Thanks for joining me again for another episode of Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, where we rank every episode of the Star Trek franchise. Starting off at number 745 brings us Fairhaven Part 0, or Up the Long Ladder. Before Janeway and crew wasted 2 separate episodes in the holodeck on the Irish coast, the crew of the Next Gen would have a bit of early 1900s Ireland brought to them. It turns out a lost colony of mostly Irish folks that rejected technology was set up in the early days of human spaceflight, and no one knew about them. This seems to be a plot reused a few times throughout the franchise. How many lost colonies of human settlers can there be? As usual, Diana Muldaur plays Pulaski at a high level when others don't take this one seriously. There's a moment at around 19 minutes where Picard looks at Riker and says, "Sometimes you just have to bow to the absurd." It was thought during shooting that it was a blooper, and you could really tell it's Patrick Stewart talking to Jonathan Frakes and not in character. But you know they kept it for a cheap laugh in one of the most disjointed plot lines in Trek history. So the Enterprise evacuates these people before a disaster with their farm animals and all. There's a lot of out-of-time comedy bits that just don't work very well. Picard, at one point, future-splains computers to the simple Irish folk. There's a laughable romance plot between Riker and one of the colonists. This whole thing goes for 26 minutes of completely worthless Trek. If it was just this, it may be the worst episode of Trek. But the latter third of the episode is actually kind of interesting and saves it from the absolute bottom. The same ship that dropped off the lost colony crashed with another group of settlers on another nearby planet. The Enterprise discovers a society of clones whose genetics won't survive any more cloning. The ethics of cloning are discussed as they illegally take Pulaski and Riker's DNA without their knowledge and create clones of them to help stabilize their population. Riker and Pulaski beam down and destroy the clones of them. Though that brings up an interesting point in and of itself. Odo famously says,
"Killing your own clone is still murder."
So, some really interesting moral and legal implications. But then it comes down to putting the two colonies together to solve their mutual problems, and the episode is uncomfortable to the last spit-soaked handshake. Speaking of which, here's another load of backwash at number 744. Wagon Train to the Stupid, or Spectre of the Gun. Enterprise encounters a buoy warning them not to enter the star system they're about to enter. They do anyway and are surprised when bad things happen. Okay, that's all I have to say about this episode, right? Okay, fine. I'll address the fact that this was a way to capitalize on the declining fad of the Western. Except on a literal shoestring budget. This episode was originally envisioned to be shot in a Western town permanent set in Arizona, but Season 3 of TOS's budget was slashed to nearly nothing. It was scaled back to a soundstage set, and then just the facades you see in the episode. Which personally I think adds to the disjointed dreamlike quality of the content. I think the absurd partial sets are the most endearing part of this otherwise useless excuse for television. So when the Enterprise ignores the buoy at the beginning, they beam down to a planet to be transported to an Old West fantasy where they're being tested by a race of aliens while reenacting the shootout at the Okaya Corral. And our heroes are playing the bad guys that get shot up at the end. Except the whole thing is just a comic farce of Western/Trek writing that ends with them never having gone past the buoy, and it was just the aliens testing humanity in their minds. The crew spends a third of the episode making weapons they can't use at the end until Spock figures out the whole thing is mind over matter, and they only die if they believe they do. Taking the spot of number 743, Technobabble, or That Which Survives. This one wouldn't be terrible as a short trek. The premise might work in a short, but this one forgot 2.5 acts in the script. An Enterprise landing party beams down to a lifeless planet that, by known science, shouldn't be capable of supporting an atmosphere, but does. Replicants of the last survivor of this planet stalk the landing party and try to kill them. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is flung 1,000 light-years away, and in an effort to get back have a glitch in the warp drive that accelerates them to near warp 12. before Scotty attempts a life-or-death emergency shutdown near the end of the episode. When the Enterprise returns to the planet, they beam the 3 surviving members of the away team up. Nice neat little package that's more filler than substance and probably contains the most technobabble of the original series. As for redeeming qualities, we see both the first Hindu and helmswoman in TOS in Lieutenant Rada. Number 742. Space Lincoln, Salt Vampire Hunter. Or The Savage Curtain. When I first started this list, this episode was second from the bottom for a long time. I've watched it 4 times to truly try to understand and appreciate it. It introduces us to some widely reused Trek lore, all while sporting a script that's almost nothing but one cliché scene after another. We start off with Abraham Lincoln, floating on the view screen talking to them from space. The very first time I watched this episode, this is when I turned it off. You've got to have an extremely high suspension of disbelief to get through the first 15 minutes of this one. This version of President Lincoln convinces a landing party to beam down to the surface of a planet that's supposed to be nothing but molten lava. Though when they get there, the ground is solid and there's a breathable atmosphere. Turns out a race of rock monsters called Excalpians are doing what early Trek alien life forms do best: test humanity through combat. They pit the landing party against some of the fiercest warriors from history: Kahless of Kronos, Zora of Tiburon, Genghis Khan, and Colonel Green of post-World War III Earth. They're given some help in the form of Lincoln and Surak of Vulcan. The crew of the Enterprise is forced to watch as Kirk and company do battle. They lose Surak and Lincoln along the way, but Kirk manages to triumph over evil, and then proceeds to lecture the Excalpians on their method of acquiring knowledge through the struggles of other life forms. This one still gets the old double facepalm from me, but it does introduce us to some pretty cool characters used and mentioned again in future Trek. Maybe you're in the mood for number 741. Flesh on Display. Or Justice. In this episode, Picard violates the Prime Directive to save Wesley from the death penalty for crushing some flowers while on shore leave. Okay, all good, nothing further to talk about in this one. Oh. And, yes. Hello. The network censor must have been working overtime on this one. Welcome to the most sexualized plotline ever contrived for the Trek universe. Apparently, after only a handful of episodes, the crew is in desperate need of shore leave. The shore party is greeted by a group of scantily clad humanoids that jog everywhere and make love at the drop of a hat. Any hat. While the adults learn about adult things the Edo enjoy, Wesley makes genital jokes, and while playing ball with some other teens from the planet, he accidentally goes long and crushes some flowers. Which on any other day on this planet would have been normal Wesley Crusher kind of shameful. But on this particular day, these flowers are part of a punishment zone. A randomly determined area where no one is allowed to be for a certain period of time. More than that, there's only one punishment for any crime on this world: death. The adults from the shore party intervene just before Wesley's sentence is carried out. As if the ethics of Picard violating the Prime Directive to save Wesley aren't enough to fill time, there's some kind of god? Yeah, just God, no other alien name. It takes issue with the Enterprise being there and threatens them for the remainder of the runtime. God is just the Lycian Central Command. Change my mind. When Beverly contacts Picard, she uses her title, CMO Crusher, to identify herself for the only time ever, as if Picard didn't know who she was. One of the Edo surmises that Worf understands play. Worf is the last person to understand play. Continuing with more Season 1 TNG goodness, we have number 740. Yar falls for the Nigerian prince scam. Or Code of Honor. Even when I was a kid watching this in early rerun, this one bored me. Many have made the claim that it's the worst episode of at least TNG. The thing is, this one actually has a start-to-finish plot without a ton of filler, unlike what has come below on this list. It's just not a good plot. The Enterprise is ordered to secure the only known vaccine to a plague killing millions from a world of dark-skinned people that have kind of an Arabian culture, where the women own all the land and the men have all the power and multiple wives and husbands are normal. When the planet's leader beams to the Enterprise for talks, he's impressed by the fact that Yar is a strong woman in a position of power and kidnaps her. Yar is used to blackmail Picard into letting her stay in exchange for the vaccine. Yar then gets involved in a fight with the leader's wife in a ritual of lethal combat, after which Tasha can decide to marry the leader of the planet or leave, and still get the vaccine, per this planet's code of honor. Yar kills her opponent, then the Enterprise revives her. They get the vaccine, and we never have to return to this again. Data android-splains an obscure language known as French to the most British Frenchman ever, and the joke somehow still falls flat. This is one of the few episodes Worf isn't in at all. Wesley gets a chance to man a bridge station and sets up for his future role as acting ensign. And whether that's the best or worst part of the episode, I'll leave it to you to decide. Our final episode today is number 739, Space Gangsters, or a piece of the action. Starfleet finally gets around to checking in on a ship that went missing 100 years earlier. What they find is a planet that has been culturally contaminated by a book from the ill-fated vessel about the gangs of Chicago on early 20th century Earth. The planet has turned this book into a guide to how to live your life. Kirk and landing party are taken hostage by one of the mob bosses, who they were supposed to be meeting with peacefully. After a lot of early mob slang, they escape, but Kirk ends up being taken prisoner by another mob boss. Spock ends up trusting the first mob boss again and beams down to be taken hostage. Again. In the end, Kirk calls a meeting of the mob bosses and basically blackmails them into becoming future Federation candidates. Which doesn't seem very Starfleet, but was probably the best Kirk could do given the level of cultural contamination. The most interesting things in this episode are Kirk making up a card game called Fizbin with ridiculous rules to waste the time of his captors. And that we find out the ship's phasers can be set to stun, which I don't think is ever mentioned again in the franchise. Kirk's mobster acting in this is cringeworthy.
Ah, computer!
That program is available.
Thanks, Major. Major, Major. Thanks, Major. Major.
Unable to comply. Will advise upon completion.
Thanks, Major. Satire is track. Satire is track.
It was announced you came as friends.
Get that baby!
I always said you was yellow.
What's wrong, dude? You yellow?
Let combat continue until there is a victor.
Let mortal combat begin.
Gears. I kind of like this. I'm gonna get one myself.
Was that a contract?
Done.
A contract is a contract is a contract, but only between Ferengi.
I'm gonna give you just 8 hours to give me the things I want.
Tell you what I'm gonna give you, Snakes. I'm gonna give you to the count of 10 to get your ugly, yellow, no-good keister off my property.
When in Rome, we'll do as the Romans do.
About this long, this thick?
Baseball. There's an access tube leading to the matter-antimatter reaction chamber.
And I'm not even sure a man can live in a crawlway in the energy stream of the magnetic field that bottles up the antimatter.
Then do it. That's an order.
I must touch you. I beg it. It is my existence. Then I will live as one, even to the structure of your cells, the arrangement of chromosomes.
I am Abraham Lincoln.
I am the law!
Now, quote me a little of that poetry.
Thanks for the tea.
The face of war has never changed, Captain.
But war never changes.